Councillors, officers and those people who may be viewing us. Welcome to East Gippsland Shire Council's meeting of the 22nd of the 2nd, 22. And quite an amazing date, a palindrome if you're into those sort of things. So 22 to 22. East Gippsland Shire Council acknowledges the Gunai, Kurnai, Monero and Bidawal people as the traditional custodians of this land that encompasses East Gippsland Shire and their enduring relationship with the land and the waters of the Shire. The traditional custodians have cared and nurtured East Gippsland for tens of thousands of years. Council value their living culture and practices and their right to self-determination. Council pays respects to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people living in East Gippsland, their elders, past, present and future. East Gippsland Shire Council live streams, records and publishes its meetings via webcasting. During the meeting, any members of the public who are addressing Council will have their image and their comments recorded. No other person has the right to record Council meetings unless approval has been granted by the Chair. In line with the Local Government Act 2020, councillors are able to attend Council meetings electronically or in person as we are here tonight, and the meetings will be open to the public via live streaming. If Council encounters any technical difficulties with the live streaming during this meeting tonight, we will adjourn until the issue is resolved. If technical issues can't be resolved, the meeting may be postponed to a later time or date. Tonight we don't have any councillors attending via webcasting, live streaming or via Teams, so I can move on, councillors, on to item 1.2 and note that Councillor Buckley is an apology. And there's no other apologies tonight.
Correct, Mayor.
Thank you. Item 1.3, councillors, declarations of conflict of interest for councillors and officers.
Mayor, I'd just like to declare a material conflict of interest in item 7.1 as it relates to my employment with Council, and I will declare at that point and leave the room.
Yeah, thank you, CEO. Noted. Mayor. Item 1.4, councillors, Sorry. Mr Cannizzaro, yes, thank you. That's why we've got a diligent Deputy Mayor to remind me just to look up occasionally rather than churning ahead. Mr Cannizzaro.
Mayor, I also need to declare a conflict of interest for item 7.1.
Thank you.
I'm a direct report of the CEO and have a general conflict of interest.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Cannizzaro. Noted. Are there any other conflicts of interest? Thank you, everyone. Confirmation of the minutes. So, councillors, I need someone to move to confirm the minutes of the last meeting. Councillor Greason, were you going to do that for me?
Thank you. I'd like to move the minutes of the last meeting, but also to request an amendment to them.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Greason. Would you like to describe that amendment so that I can then seek a seconder to that, please?
So the amendment is to include my report to this meeting.
Thank you, Councillor Greason. Do I have a seconder to that? Councillor Stowe, thanks very much. Do you need to speak to that motion, Councillor Greason?
No, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. We just note that there was a technical issue with submitting that report, so there's nothing untoward about that. So thank you for bringing that to attention. Councillor Stowe, did you wish to speak to that?
I don't, thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Anybody else like to speak to it? Is the motion opposed? In that case, I'll put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? Thank you, councillors. Carried unanimously. Thanks, Councillor Greason. I hope that that was much more painless than we thought it might be, so terrific.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Councillors, the next meeting is on Tuesday the 15th of March 2022, a much less auspicious date than today, to be held at the Corporate Centre here, 273 Main Street, Bairnsdale, commencing at 6 p.m. Councillors, I'll move on. Item 1.6, requests for leave of absence. I see none, thank you. Open forum, I believe there are no petitions, questions or public submissions.
Correct.
Thank you. And councillors, we're moving on to item 2, notices of motion. And firstly, I would like to actually move a condolence motion from the chair, if I can, councillors. So the motion is valet former Councillor John Wilkin, and I'd like to move that Council conveys condolences on behalf of East Gippsland Shire to the family of the late John Wilkin, who passed away on the 13th of February. Do I have a seconder to that? Thank you very much, Councillor Allen. So I'm going to talk briefly to the motion, if that's all right, councillors. So thank you very much. So John, Wilkin and I actually served on my first council together in 2012, and he served a term of 2012 to 2015, and unfortunately had to leave a bit earlier than would have been preferred. And I point out that John was a very private person. He was a dedicated and assiduous councillor, and I enjoyed his attention to detail on council matters. He was an engineer, and he cast an engineer's eye over everything that we saw before us. I made a note here that he was ruthless in a positive way in the detail and a great analytical thinker. Prior to being elected a councillor, John worked as an engineer in local government, predominantly in Surf Coast and East Gippsland regions, and in fact in Orbost Shire. His daughter Bianca also previously worked for East Gippsland Shire Council in planning, and we note that John is survived by wife Bev. And so I move that we convey those condolences to John's family. Would anybody else like to speak to that motion? And I realise that most people here did not know John, but I find it a great privilege to be able to speak to John, and note that we spent a long time sitting together just over there. So councillors, I'll put that motion to the vote. All those in favour? Thank you, councillors. Carried unanimously. Now, I believe there is a second motion. Councillor White.
Thank you, Mayor. Sadly, I would like to move a motion to to a former colleague, councillor, and quite a good friend, Councillor Ben Buckley, who's also passed, and that council conveys condolences on behalf of the East Gippsland Shire to the family of the late Ben Buckley.
Thanks, Councillor White.
So, yes,
would you like to speak to that so we can then
yes,
find a seconder?
Yes,
Terrific.
Yes, so on behalf of East Gippsland Shire Council, I extend sincere condolences to the family and friends of former councillor, the late Ben Buckley. Ben made a unique and valuable contribution to East Gippsland, including service to his community through local government. Ben was first elected as an East Gippsland Shire councillor in 2003 and served the community on 5 consecutive councils, 18 years, until his retirement in 2020. In his final year of council, Ben served as my deputy as I was mayor in the last year
That's
of
right.
that council, and because of the consequences of that last year of council with the Black Summer and the COVID, Ben was a valuable and very supportive deputy, and because of his long service with the community, he was there for anybody that needed that help during that terrible time. But before becoming an East Gippsland Shire councillor, he served 12 years as an Omeo Shire councillor before amalgamation, including 1 term as president. As a long-time Benambra resident, away from the council chamber, Ben was heavily involved in community life across many pursuits and generations. He will be remembered as a great East Gippsland character who was always approachable and had the interests of his community at heart always.
Thanks, Councillor White. Do I have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Crook. Terrific. I think in this situation, I ask, would anybody like to speak to the motion first? Councillor White, I think in the situation, if you'd like to speak to it. Beyond what you've already said, so thank you.
Just to say that I hope that the group support me in this motion to the Buckley family, because Ben, as I said, was not only a servant of the community but also a good friend. He became a good friend of mine, although the legend preceded him. Everybody knows Ben Buckley, but I had not really engaged with him much until I got on council with him, and I enjoyed his company. We often would sit back after meetings and just talk about life in general, and he was a great listener and also had some amazing stories to tell over the exploits of his life. So, as I said earlier, my condolences to his family and friends, and I hope that councillors would support this motion.
Thanks, Councillor White. Councillor Crook, would you like to speak to the motion?
Certainly, look, only to say that Ben obviously made a significant and unique contribution to East Gippsland over many years, and I thoroughly support our council in recognising that and offering our condolences to his friends and family.
Thanks, Councillor Crook. I'll just go through the normal process. Is the motion opposed? Would anybody else like to speak to, for or against the motion? So we'll just go around the room. So Councillor Stowe, Councillor Uri, Councillor Allen.
Councillor White Crook says is true about Ben, but really, let's be honest, he was a character, he's a rascal and he's a cheeky bugger. I recall one time they opened up the airport up at Dinner Plane, and they were flying in all the media and all the executives from Sydney, the first plane to land at Dinner Plane. And this was a big occasion, the first plane to land. They came in over the trees, they on the tarmac landed, got up the end. Well, who should be there? Ben in his little Cessna, just waving to them. He'd beaten them to it. And they're the sort of tales that people will remember for some time now. There's 1,000 of them. Buckley's Chance, I think, the book.
Yeah.
I'd recommend you have a read of it sometime, where he lost his licence for dumping super on the football players up at Amber Oval. There's 1,000 tales, and we should remember Ben for all the good things he did, which you've outlined, but also for being the character that he was.
Thanks very much, Councillor Stowe. Councillor Uri.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I served on council with Ben for 2 terms when I was first elected under council in 2005 to 2008 and then again in 2008 to 2012. But by that time, he was already an experienced councillor, given the record that you referred to, Mr Mayor. While I found him an unconventional councillor, he couldn't always be relied on to read his notes, which were always delivered in full hard copy up to Penumbra. I always found him very respectful in his dealings with people. His willingness to meet with community members to really try and understand their issues and try and resolve their problems was probably the quality that I most admired about him as a councillor. So I'm very happy to support this motion and to express my condolences to our colleague, Councillor Buckley, and the Buckley family.
Yep.
Thank you, Mr.
Thanks, Councillor Uri. Lovely. Councillor Allen.
Thanks, Mayor. I've been privileged to have known Ben for a lot of years. His involvement as a councillor has been well documented everywhere, but it's his contribution to the community that probably can't be quantified. He was involved in so many ways. With his Mercy's flights, his contribution to aviation in a number of innovative ways. They were all legendary, but it was his interactions within the community that gave him a place in the heart of so many people. Ben is a legend, and he's a legend that will live on in East Gippsland and elsewhere forever. Rest in peace, Ben.
Thanks, Councillor Allen. Lovely words. Would anybody else like to speak? I'll just say a few words if I can, councillors. So I had the privilege and the honour and sometimes the challenge of serving 2 terms with Ben, and it was always interesting, and it was always an interesting time with Ben. There was no doubt about it. He was often unpredictable, but always a present and connected and dedicated councillor. I'd say that he was always present. He was there, and if there was an attendance or a meeting or a council gathering, Ben was there. He really made that commitment to be there, and that was something that was really fantastic. I suggest, similar to Councillor Uri, he was a champion of the underdog, and he was ready to bat for and represent those people who he might have felt had been treated unfairly, and he was excellent at that. But he was also incredibly respectful at doing that. He was a dignified character, there's no doubt about it. I also point out that he was a constitutional expert, and he had a very dog-eared constitution that usually sat on the table beside him, and with handwritten notes or something that he could refer to at some stage. And he was also a libertarian, so he had very strong beliefs around that, and I think that was something that played out through his political life. But I also talk to the fact that he was an amazing pilot, and I think that'll come out through many of the stories about Ben. And and I've known Ben for nearly 28 years, and in the early days establishing the Alpine School, I used to charter Ben to fly me everywhere around the state. So we spent hours, days, weeks together in a very small aircraft, and we spent a lot of time talking. He flew me over Mount Baw where he crashed in 1950-something or other, and showed me the tree. We hand-started his frozen aeroplane at Mount Hotham Airport in the middle of winter. So just like in the barnstorming days, like you see those things in old movies where, contact, swing the propeller. He did that at a frozen airport at Mount Hotham in the middle of winter. And he used to remind me when we were flying in poor conditions, which always seemed to befall me whenever I flew with him, to ride the plane like a horse, to just sit there and go with it. And those reassuring words were always very comforting. Although when you're in fog at 5,000 feet somewhere over the Australian Alps in the middle of winter and with ice, any reassuring words were reassuring. But we never fell into any problems because he was such an amazing pilot. He was an intuitive pilot. He was at one with the machine, and that was really, really something else. And I spent many hours talking with him about the remote high country. I had the privilege in my younger years of having walked, tramped and bushwalked through most of the country that he'd flown over. And so we often had great stories to be able to compare those different places. So I just wanted to support everything else that has been said and wish the family well, wish Ben well on his long final, which is an aeronautical term when you're on your last landing, and my deep thoughts to everybody. He'll be really sadly missed. So, councillors, on that note, I'll put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. Thank you for all your kind words, and we will convey those to the family of both John and former councillor John Wilkin and former councillor Ben Buckley. Thank you, councillors. Let's move on, shall we? We have another notice of motion, item 2.1, and this is a request for refund or rebate fees and charges for waste management. Councillor Crook.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Councillors, I would like us to write to the state government authorities responsible for waste management policy, requesting a refund or rebate of a significant proportion of the fees and charges paid by our Shire, so to provide both innovative waste management and minimisation solutions and incentives for the uptake of the circular economy and initiatives to that end in East Gippsland. Our Shire is subject to...
Hang on a second, Councillor Crook. I think that's a motion, so we need a seconder, and Councillor Greason is happy to second it. So, would you like to now speak to the motion? Sorry, I'm being very procedural tonight, so...
No, that's fine.
Great, thank you.
So, look, the rationale for this is that our Shire is subject to a range of statutory fees and charges in relation to waste management, over which many of them we have very little or, in fact, no control. And this money, charged by the state government, effectively leaves the region. And at the same time, we continue to experience increase in government fees for waste management. And look, there's lots of the fees that we're charged, there's very little, or shall I say, very little clear benefit to the ratepayers of East Gippsland and the general community. So at the same time, when the costs of waste management have never been higher, there's a real need, obviously, to minimise waste and to embrace the circular economy. And those needs have never been more urgent. So this motion, if acted on by the state government, would provide a significant increase in our Shire's capacity to meet that waste challenge and better equip us to solve the challenges of waste management and maximise the benefits of the circular economy to East Gippsland and our broader community.
Thanks, Councillor Crook. Thank you. Would the seconder, Councillor Greason, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you. No, I won't add to what Councillor Crook has said.
Thanks, Councillor. Is the motion opposed? Would anybody else like to speak to or for or against the motion? Councillor White.
I would just like to add a possible amendment that there is an error in the spelling. I don't know whether that's significant at this
Let's
stage.
check that and make sure.
The fourth last word, border, it should be broader. Is that significant in the motion?
Okay, so that's just in the rationale. I think that's, thank you for your keen eyes, Councillor White, but I think that isn't, as it isn't part of the actual motion, it's not important here, is it?
Through you, Mayor. Look, there is a couple of typos in there that have been identified, so we'll make sure that the minutes reflect that appropriately, and obviously
Great, thank you.
any correspondence will have that corrected.
Yep, terrific. Thanks, Councillor White. Excellent. Councillor Crook, are you happy with tidying up of the spelling? And
Yes, and I thank the council for their collective efforts on the grammar there.
So I understand the motion isn't opposed and nobody else wishes to speak to the motion. No, somebody else would like to speak to the motion. Councillor Uri, thank you.
Sorry, thank you, Mr Mayor. Just to fully support this motion, I think it is a great initiative for council to go ahead and write this letter. The circular economy in East Gippsland is something that is probably not very well developed yet, but it's an initiative which I think increasingly we need to pay attention to and support. And in fact, in the draft Sustainability Environment Strategy, which has just closed for comment, it's been out there for comment for some time, the circular economy features very strongly in that strategy, so it will be a focus of council's attention. And if we had more funds to support that, it would be really helpful. So at the moment, I think there's a lack of transparency about what happens to all those fees and charges that leave council. And if they were reinvested into the circular economy, it would make a huge difference to us being able to achieve in that space. So I support the motion. Thank you,
great.
Mr Mayor.
Couldn't agree more. Would anybody else like to speak for or against the motion? No, well, thank you, Councillor, and I certainly echo and resonate what's been said. So I'll put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thanks, Councillor Crook, for bringing that to the table. Now, there's no deferred business, and now we're up to councillor or delegates' reports, and I know there's a flurry of interest in which direction we go tonight. Councillor Allen, are you happy to go first? Yeah. Great, thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Look, the first thing I'd like to mention tonight is that there was 3 Lakes entrance businesses that each won silver awards in the recently held 2021 Victorian Tourism Awards, which were deferred due to COVID. So Frolic by the Sea, Beachcomber Accommodation and Sandbar Motel were all recognised in their various categories, so I congratulate them on that success. And I'd quickly mention a couple of events that I've attended over the last 3 weeks. One really enjoyable one was the Colour Gang exhibition opening night at the gallery, which was a great evening and very, very well supported, and a number of other councillors were there, and I think they would say that it was really a worthwhile night. And along with Councillor Stowe, I attended the Recovery and Resilience Commonwealth Recovery and Resilience Agency outreach at Omeo. There was a big number of agencies represented in the room, and there was a very, very big attendance. I believe there was 97 people went through the door, and when you consider that the population of the district's only 400 odd, that's a very, very good turnout. And there was similar events held at Now, Buckley and Mallacoota. And last Wednesday, I had the honour of launching their Partners in Prevention of Violence 10-year plan at the hub. Council staff have devoted a lot of time and effort into developing that plan along with other organisations, and it was great to be there to be able to launch that plan along with Councillor Uri and Councillor Van Diggle. And I congratulate our staff for their efforts in developing that plan. And the other thing I'd quickly mention, and I imagine everyone else will mention it, I attended the Brew Them Blues on Saturday. Again, I saw a number of councillors trying to be inconspicuous, hiding in corners and whatnot, and a few council officers. So it was a great event, and it was great to see the community responding and coming out and enjoying not only the day and the evening, but just being together. Thank you.
Good on you. Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Crook?
Thank you, Arthur, and thank you, Mayor. Yes, look, I concur with what Councillor Allen has said there. I also attended the Colour Gang exhibition launch. It was a great evening. It was really well attended. Some fantastic art from local artists, and what a great initiative supporting those people in what they do, and a great opportunity for them to showcase and sell their art to the public. So that was very enjoyable. And also the Brew and Blues Festival. I don't think I was too conspicuous. I think I spent most of the Saturday night in the middle of the dance floor. So I actually met quite a lot of constituents that evening, and I had a great time. I was the designated driver, so I remember all of the conversations. So fantastic. That's all for now. Thanks.
Good on you. Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Stowe?
Thank you, Mayor. Look, I've attended many events in the last 3 weeks, as usual. The highlight was the Red Meat Conference. It was put on by the Ag Group. 250 people attended.
Wow.
And they had some great guest speakers. They covered topics like estate planning, marbling of meat with not only beef, also sheep, the future outlook for the industry, which is quite rosy, I might say. They had the producer of Paddock to Plate television series there, and he spoke about perhaps coming to this area and doing a program. And also they had a couple of people from Kangaroo Island that were devastated by fires, and they spoke about their fire recovery. I was worried about that, bearing in mind what we'd been through when they first did it. I thought it might have been a little close to home, but really, really well. The day started at 7:30 in the morning. I went home about 9 o'clock at night, and they were still rocking and rolling at that stage. So it was a great day and very well organised, and I congratulate the Ag Group for doing it.
Good on you. I've only heard great things about it. Thanks, Councillor Stowe. Councillor Greeson?
Thank you very much. I attended, I'm just going to talk about two things that I did, and they happened on the same day. So I attended the LARJAC meeting, the Local Aboriginal Justice Advisory Committee meeting on the 15th of Feb. Very well attended by all justice-related organisations in Gippsland and East Gippsland. With everybody reporting back on initiatives and events and local incidents involving youth and police and the legal and justice system. Alice Pepper provided a report on the extensive work of GLOWAC and advised that GLOWAC is currently negotiating a review of their regional settlement agreement, which was put in place in 2010 after many years of hard work by their elders, so it's a pretty amazing milestone. There's a new venture called Warragunya, which will provide accommodation for men coming out of jail. They aim to connect these men to their culture, community and healing services, and the accommodation will be based somewhere between Sale and Yarram. There'll be 8 units, each fully self-contained and able to house 2 men. So that's pretty fantastic. And I also attended the Gippsland Red Meat Conference, and it was a fantastic event. It was really quite uplifting in many ways. At the Riviera Convention Centre. Very well organised, many excellent presentations throughout the day, and some very delicious red meat served at the meals. But my particular interest was the carbon neutral target of the Meat and Livestock Australia and the Carbon Farming Forum. And the take-home messages that I picked up, and I picked up a few from it, although I still don't understand how carbon farming happens, but that's fine. But the MLA have a target of zero emission by 2030. This is based on overseas market requirements because 70% of the industry is exported. So it's very important to consider what other companies and countries want and require. The statement was made that the federal government policies and public statements are out of date and very reactive. They were very upfront about this. And that government should step out of the way and allow the agriculture industry to determine how to do it. And that government inaction in Australia has meant that carbon price has risen only a small amount here compared with overseas where it's tripled. They talk about converting carbon to animals improving efficiency at growing carbon and managing stock. They made the point that any man-made activity will have emissions, that it is possible to store carbon in the ground for 20 years. A number of them talked about the clear links between productivity gains and emission reduction. And so the MLA remit is to pursue activities with multiple wins: low carbon, climate friendly and productivity gains. And they also talked about managing methane from cattle, estimating that there's 2 tonnes equivalent of carbon dioxide on every animal on the farm, and that it's able to bring that right down. So I think in summary, the productive and profitable livestock graziers build soil carbon at the same time. Increasing soil carbon levels is a key indicator of not only soil health, but the landscape and business resilience. The decision-making framework has been altered, and we now ask, will this decision and action increase soil carbon or not? So that's a quote from Matt Crozier. So it was an excellent day. Thank you.
Thanks for that great report and your insights from it, from that day, and also thank you for attending LARJAC. It's one of the groups that I lament not being able to continue to be part of. It's really important, so thanks, Councillor Greason. Councillor Uri.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I went to the opera.
Nice.
Yes, the opportunities in East Gippsland are extraordinary, really. This was at St Mary's Church, and I'd just like to congratulate Andrea Ford and her team. This is the group of people who organise opera on the lake. They've done so for a lot of years now, but due to the COVID thing, they chose the venue of St Mary's Church, which was wonderful. Teddy Tahu Rhodes and Georgia Wilkinson with the stars performing, and a really excellent afternoon. I just wanted to say a little bit more too about the 16th of February launch of East Gippsland Partners in Violence Prevention, the launch of that 10-year plan, which Councillor Allen has mentioned. I found this it's an important event, and I just wanted to highlight it. Auntie Daphne Yarram was the keynote speaker, and the Deputy Mayor also read Council's statement of commitment too. But Auntie Daphne mentioned a few things which I would just like to highlight. First of all, I wanted to say that it's a multi-agency approach. So there are about 18 agencies, I think, involved, if I've got that right, in this 10-year plan. So it's really important. Auntie Daphne mentioned using a strength-based approach when we're looking at situations of violence in the family, and the importance of male voices in this area. It's really important that this not be regarded just as a women's issue. So it was particularly wonderful to have both the Deputy Mayor and the CEO there. Their presence was really noted and important. And also the importance of taking the step for people to ask for help and to recognise that that's a really crucial time in this journey for people, and to respond to that appropriately. And finally, just the importance of actions coming out of this 10-year plan. It's great to have the plan, but we need to see the actions. I just wanted to mention briefly the recent announcement of the federal government funding through the Black Summer Bushfire Program. Obviously, our communities in East Gippsland are really mostly delighted that approximately $30 million is coming our way from that program. So a lot of the communities are very happy about that. Obviously, some applicants or applications have not been successful, and that's being followed up, I'm pleased to say, with an unknown outcome. But I'm glad to see that people, particularly our federal member, is going to see what can be done with those applicants. But in particular, I think I would just like to say that I'm very glad that there's been an obvious acceptance of the importance of the arts in building community resilience, and that's been shown through a number of the programs that have been given funding. Obviously, buildings and facilities are of immense importance in this recovery phase, but how we come together in communities and hear one another and facilitate ways forward, in my view, can't be overlooked. And I just note that in listening to the councillors' reports, how often arts events are mentioned, music events and dancing events, and art exhibitions in the galleries. So it's been wonderful to see that some of those programs have been funded also. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Great. Thank you for that terrific report. Councillor White.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to begin, I didn't attend, but to congratulate the Bruthen community on re-establishing their Blues Festival. I was well aware of the reasons why they postponed 2 years ago, the Black Summer fires and fatigue, and that fatigue continued for some time, and of course then COVID, so congratulate them on reinstating what was becoming an absolute iconic event in our region. So thank you, the people of Bruthen. The Red Meat Conference has been possibly discussed, and mostly I will be repeating the words of other councillors, but what I liked about this year, because it had to have time off also, was that they changed from the beef conference to red meat, which allowed other red meat products, and I'll put my hand up and say lamb, into that venue. Their guest speakers were really good. They discussed many topics that are topical, and the speakers who spoke particularly about supply and demand were very upbeat about the future in not just the short term but in the longer term as a protein shortage around the world. Congratulate the Ag Group who took this on for the first time and did a really good job, but also to acknowledge, and I'm sure they got a lot out of this event, but acknowledge the sponsors. For without the sponsors, the event could not go ahead. They all had a stake in the event in terms of, you know, they supply knowledge and materials to farmers, and the fact that this conference is recognised as one of the biggest and best events held in this subject. But also I'd like to acknowledge the fact that by bringing it to East Gippsland, where the farming community and the economy that they support is a very, very big part of our whole economy here in East Gippsland. So it was good to see the farmers get out, and they would have got a lot of benefit about that. But when the lectures were split, so 2 consecutive lectures, the one that got me, I wanted to go. I was going to the one on the lamb, and the auditorium filled up with beef producers, and there were about 12 or 14 of us in another room getting our lecture on lamb. But we'll stick it out, and we'll be still there. So thank you.
Thanks, Councillor White. Yeah, it sounded like an amazing gathering, the Red Meat Conference, so terrific. Councillor Van Diggle, good evening.
Good evening, thank you. A lot of the things that I've attended have already been discussed in quite some detail. I probably should have done it before, but I also just wanted to extend my condolences to the Buckley family. When you were talking about Ben earlier, I never knew Ben in a councillor context, but when I was younger, I was best friends with his granddaughter, and I had the privilege of tasting Milo on ice cream for the first time for breakfast. He flew me in a plane so many times doing flips that he wanted me to hold this round ball to see if it would float, like in the air, the more that I would spin, and he would, you know, went to the Hindamunji races, and I had the honour of throwing lollies out of the
Oh, that was you.
that
Yeah,
once,
okay.
and I felt very special. So it's really sad to know that he's passed, and I just extend my condolences to Sonia as well. So as I said, a lot of the things that I've done have already been discussed. With the Colour Gang, I guess I just wanted to say that it is an initiative of Now We're Young, and when they call the Colour Gang, I think that's really, really accurate. And a lot of the artwork in the exhibition was extremely colourful. I had my eye on a couple, and they were sold within like a minute. The one you wanted, Tom, I really wanted as well. So I want to find that artist and get an artwork, but that was really amazing, and there was a lot of people there, and it just showed that the community can be really united through art. And I look forward to seeing more exhibitions at the gallery. But but the last few weeks have been really busy for me because I've officially become a Bairnsdale resident as of last week, so haven't had a chance to attend too many things with moving, but now I'm officially out of Paynesville and a Bairnsdale resident, so still look forward to supporting Paynesville this weekend at the Paynesville Music Festival, so everyone should come along. I missed out on Breathe and Blues, and my dad's playing on Saturday night at the pub, if you want to go.
Thanks, Councillor Van Digel. Terrific. Councillors, frustratingly, I spent a whack of the last period of time in isolation because of COVID, and I'm COVID-free and tested negative every time, just to make that point. So I really have been there and done what a lot of people did in a much more difficult way, so only 7 days, and that was significant enough. But prior to that, I just want to point out one particular event that I think is significant. That was the Hobie Kayak Series 13 Round 11 competition at Bem River. And these are significant events, and we support them as a Shire. And there were 90 competitors at Bem River that weekend, 90. And I dare say that Deb and Ray did their best to allow them to drink the pub dry and fish the lake out of fish. But of course, it's catch and release. And it's just amazing. These events are incredible. They attract people from all over Australia. And these events wander up and down the coast, down to Tasmania as the next round. And fingers crossed, these are international events. So they take place right around the world. The competitors there were talking about China, Canada, Europe, USA. And so we're hoping that at some stage in the next little while that Australia and East Gippsland might feature in one of their world events. So that was fantastic. I just wanted to point that out. There's a swag of other things that I've been involved in, which are much more mundane. But I also want to point out and acknowledge the work that all the councillors have done in filling in when I haven't been able to get to places and delegated those authorities because of other competing matters or being in isolation, and the community really salutes you for your work. So being out and being present is really an important part of being a councillor. So well done and thank you. So councillors, let's move on to item 5.1, Officers' Reports, and this is from the Office of the Chief Executive Officer, and it's 5.1.1, Municipal Association of Victoria Rules Review, and Chief Executive Officer Anthony, take us away.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mayor. Let me just bring up my notes for a moment.
Okay.
The report that is before you tonight is Municipal Association of Victoria Rules Review, which is seeking your consideration of the recommendations as they are presented, but particularly in terms of adopting the submission that is attached to the report in relation to the rules review. The MAV is reviewing these rules and has released a discussion paper as outlined in the paper. The rules have not been reviewed for a considerable period of time, and they haven't been formally amended since 2013. The background paper provides some discussion points and some options in terms of consideration, and that is what has informed the submission that is before you tonight. There are 4 key reasons for the review. The current rules need to be modernised. The new rules should provide greater clarity for the board and membership. The new rules should address oversights in the current rules, and the rules need to enable State Council, the MAV Board and the Office of the MAV President to function effectively. The MAV have requested that where a council determines to submit a response, that it has a resolution to support that response. As council is a member of the MAV, I believe this is an important thing for us to be part of and submission for us to make. So the report, recommendations and the submission are there for your consideration there.
Thanks for that, CEO. Councillors, are there any questions of the CEO about this important report that we're submitting to the MAV? Okie dokie then. So there is a recommendation then, councillors. Do I have a motion? Councillor Uri. Do I have
Yes, I'm happy to move the recommendation, Mr.
Terrific,
Mayor.
thank you. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Greason. Councillor Uri, would you like to speak to the motion?
Just briefly, Mr Mayor, thank you. The MAV is an important organisation, I think, for us on council. But I think this council, through the discussions that we've had about this submission, have indicated that we need to be convinced of its effectiveness, and I think we can do better in terms of our relationship. So I thank the CEO for drafting this submission. I think it's important that we do make it. In particular, I think it highlights the importance of our relationship with MAV and their relationship with the state and federal government. I think that's very, very important. I think we can see that unless they do have a strong relationship with those levels of government, then the effectiveness is reduced. And I think the MAV also needs to focus on their core objectives, and also the measuring of the success. So we've obviously had a bit to do with the MAV. We have been visited by the President, Councillor David Clark, and also by Councillor Brett Tassari, who's our rural Gippsland representative. And we've also submitted motions to the MAV at different times. But I think we're yet to be convinced of where those motions go, even when they're passed at State Council. So I think that the points the CEO has made in their submission really go to those, the need for us to see a more effective organisation and relationship happen. So I'm very happy to support this submission. Thank you.
Terrific. Great points, well made. Councillor Grecian, would you like to speak?
I won't really add to what Councillor Uri has said, just that we did have quite extensive discussion about ongoing membership of the MAV, and there were many reasons to continue our relationship with the MAV. So I'm very happy to support the submission. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Is the motion opposed? Would anybody else like to speak for or against the motion? I want to say a couple of words and just acknowledge exactly what you've said, Councillor Uri. I think you've really summed it up very eloquently, really synthesised a lot of the points and concerns, but also thank the CEO for the detailed work. In typical MAV fashion, there was a lot in there, and I think sometimes a bit of overreach in terms of detail, but I really appreciate the work you've done in responding to each point and being able to capture the view of the council in doing so. So thank you for doing that. Councillors, on that note, I'll put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? Thanks, councillors. Passed unanimously. We're on to item 5.2, Assets and Environment, and this is a contract for contract 2021-1453 World Construction Package 3 tender awards. And Fiona, Ms Weigel, let's go.
Thank you, Mayor. As you've stated, this is to award an important package of works to do with the world redevelopment. The report considers the award of the contract for the third World Sporting Precinct redevelopment construction package, and this particular package will deliver a new pavilion for use on a weekly basis by over 900 netball players and the region's hockey clubs. The details of the tender and the panel recommendations are provided to you in confidential attachment 2. As the council as well know, construction of the World Sporting Precinct commenced in 2021 with the construction of the hockey pitch, the main entrance and the car park well underway. Later in 2022, we awarded the construction package, it was 2021, construction package 2, which covers the additional car parking and the new netball courts. And that site work is due to commence in April of this year. The project originates from Council's adoption of the Bairnsdale Sporting Facilities Plan back in 2018, which identified the project as a high priority due to the strong participation and growth in netball, hockey, soccer and futsal. We have been fortunate that the project has attracted overall significant investment from both the Australian Government and the Victorian State Government, and they're collectively providing over $10 million of funding for this overall project. We have also been able to attract a low interest loan and additional funds to ensure that we can deliver the project in full. When completed, this regional standard facility will provide a new netball complex, hockey pitches with lighting and a synthetic pitch, new soccer pitches, and all the works associated with the access, roads, paths and so on, and 2 pavilions servicing multiple clubs and sporting codes. I think we all know that this project, though very large for us to deliver, will ensure that an excellent standard of sporting facilities are provided for the East Gippsland community for decades to come, and will significantly improve playing conditions, encouraging growth and participation and unlocking the ability to hold regional competitions. The World's Sporting Package 3, which is before you tonight, is a very important stage of this overall project, which will see the delivery of the new pavilion. Councillors, there is a recommendation as before you, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Terrific, thanks for that. There is a recommendation, but are there any questions or clarifications required, councillors? An important and significant project? Nothing? So there's a recommendation. Do we have a motion? Councillor Uri again.
Sorry, I will.
You will ask a question? Great. Terrific.
Ms Weigel, for the benefit of those people who might be watching, I was wondering if you could give us a quick update on the progress to date. So some of our projects have been delayed with the weather. I mean, there are all sorts of issues affecting projects, but this one might have been affected by the weather. Can you give us an idea of whether it's on track?
It's
please?
still within the overall on track for the whole project.
Yep.
Yes, the weather was not kind to be constructing civil works over the last 6 months. That has put us slightly behind schedule in terms of the construction of the hockey pitches, but we're confident that we can start to make up time. So in terms of the overall project, we're still on track. There are some delays here and there with elements of it with weather related and supply related. I know our contractors have had difficulty sourcing some of the materials that they required for various elements, but well on its way, and it'll be great to see the netball court started shortly as well. Yep. Thank you, Councillor.
Great. Thanks for the question and the response. That's appreciated. Are there any other questions, comments, observations, councillors? I don't see any, so there is a recommendation. Do I have a motion? Thanks, Councillor Crook. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Van Diegel. Councillor Crook, would you like to speak?
Only that this is obviously a very important stage in the project and requires our approval to proceed.
Thanks, Councillor Crook. Councillor Van Diegel, would you like to speak to the motion?
No, just to second what Tom said, and it's obviously an exciting project and we need to do this to progress.
Terrific, thank you. Is the motion opposed? Would anybody else like to speak for or against the motion? No, I don't see anybody. I'll just make the point that I think that more people, more active, more often is just a great outcome for our community, and I'm sure that this will help bring that about. On that word, councillors, I'll put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? Thanks, councillors. Carried unanimously. Terrific. Let's stay with you, Ms Weigel, and go on to... Oh, thank you, CEO. So, for the record, so what was in the confidential documentation is now on display for those to see. And I'll just pause for a moment. A significant and important contract. Terrific. Thank you, councillors. Thanks, Ms Hack. Right. Let's move on to item 5.2.2, and this is a Capital Works and Major Projects Quarter 2 2021-22 report. So again, Fiona, take it away. We're with you for this whole section, so hold on.
Thank you, Mayor. Look, this is an important report in terms of our accountability and providing councillors with good information around where our capital program is at. This is, as we've said, the second quarterly report. As we progress through the year, we're constantly revising and reviewing the program, and making small adjustments along the way. Part of that is to revise the budget down to 75.19 million. This doesn't mean that we've just got rid of those other projects. It means that there's, due to some of the delays we've just talked about weather and supply constraints, some of the projects phasing needed to be changed. So some projects will continue on to 21-22. So therefore there is a carry forward identified of almost $20 million. The carry forward is, and the projects that are being carried forward or a component that's being carried forward are detailed in the report. At the end of the quarter, we report a combined expenditure and commitments of $51 million, which is 67% of the revised budget. I must say this is an exceptional effort by the team in the current conditions to spend or commit over $50 million in the first 6 months, which is well in excess of a normal year's full budget. The holding account summary is also provided as part of this report, which during the quarter, approximately $1 million of savings were identified, and the majority of this was then distributed to new or existing projects requiring additional budget. The balance of the holding account is currently $456,000. The program that's provided in the attachments covers over 186 separate projects as at the end of December, of which 17 are complete, 153 are on schedule, and 7 are yet to commence. There are a couple that have been on hold or are withdrawn. 3 projects have been allocated funding from the Quick Response Fund, being the Metung Water Park dosing system, the Now Shed and Minor Works, and Newlands Acoustics. There is a balance in this fund of still of $50,000. 3 contracts were awarded under delegation in the second quarter, being the Swan Reach netball courts, the Nicholson Sarsfield Road footpath construction, and the Bairnsdale Airport water reticulation project. Councillors, the report is before you, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks for the comprehensive report and the summary then. Councillors, any questions? Councillor Greason.
Thank you, Ms Weigel. This is a pretty amazing amount of work that we're undertaking in East Gippsland, 186 separate projects. A lot of this is, I imagine, due to grants from bushfire and a whole lot of programs that have been happening since then. But can you tell me what it would have been like about 2 years ago, how many projects this organisation would have been responsible for in a normal year?
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, in a normal year we would have had somewhere between $30 and $35 million in the budget. So we've got more than double. We started off with more than triple that amount. So it is a phenomenal amount. And as you've identified, a lot of it has come from grant funding, which has allowed us to expand our program.
Thank you. It's incredibly impressive that we're actually achieving most of them within the time frame set. Thank you.
Yep, thanks for pointing that out. That's important. Thanks, Councillor Greason. Councillor Uri.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Ms Weigel, to have almost $20 million, I think, as carryover, is that perhaps what you'd expect with a budget of this extent, and will that cause problems? Because I know there'll be new projects coming online as well, and there's always a problem to deliver where, you know, there are a lot of headwinds at the moment. There's a lot going on. As we've already discussed, I think the weather has slowed down some of our projects as well. So we've had continual rain when we should have been making roads and doing a lot of our civil works. And we've had some cost escalations, but also some supply issues, you know, not just our council, but right across Victoria we've had issues with supply of materials that were once very common. I don't know if any of you have gone into Bunnings recently to try and get something for yourselves, but it's really quite difficult. So that's meant that some of the phasing of our projects has had to be reviewed. Some of them were already multi-year projects, so in terms of their overall ability to meet their grant milestones, they'll still be able to do that and be delivered, but within the extended period of the 2 financial years rather than more funding in this first year. So yes, it is a challenging period. I think that the team is doing a really remarkable job given the circumstances. We have grown the team, but we are also looking at our resourcing internally to make sure we can deliver the program. Terrific.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks for the question and the clarification. Councillor Van Deel.
This says there's 8 projects that have been withdrawn. I'm just curious as to why they're withdrawn. Is that a council decision? Is that based off a needs assessment or priorities, or curious why?
So some of those projects that are withdrawn are actually rolled into another project. So where we had two projects that were very similar or was a component of, so there was some budget there that was rolled together. And there has been some other projects that have been broken down. So the budget's been used slightly differently. So the original project has been withdrawn. There are a couple that have been withdrawn because we did not have the capacity to deliver them this year, and they will be rebudgeted in future years. So it doesn't mean that we're never going to deliver them, but we'll just put them into a future year's program.
Great, thanks for the question. Are there any further questions, clarifications, observations, councillors? In which case, there is a recommendation there. Do we have a motion? Councillor Allen, thank you. Seconder, Councillor Uri. Terrific. Councillor Allen, would you like to speak to the motion?
No, I think it's pretty much a procedural thing, and I'll leave it at that.
Great, thank you. Councillor Uri.
Oh, no, just to say that 54.20% of the adopted budget is a wonderful achievement, I think. So really happy to support the adoption of this report.
Couldn't agree more. At this time of year, it's amazing. Yep, and with the circumstances, so thank you. Would anybody else, is the motion opposed? Pardon me. Would anybody else like to speak for or against the motion? John, you've shot your mask to pieces there. That's all right. More masks are available. Councillors, in which case I'll put the motion to the vote. Pardon me?
Get demerit points.
Get demerit points, that's right. I'll put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? Thanks, councillors. A very important report, and thanks very much, Ms Weigel, for presenting it. And the last one from you is the Paynesville Canals Private Jetty Construction Policy.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, the last from me this evening, and a little different.
It is different. Yeah.
This is a policy that was originally developed right back when we saw the beginning of the Riviera properties and the development of the canals in Paynesville. So it's a policy that has seen us well, but it hasn't been reviewed for quite some time. In those years, conditions have changed, requirements around jetty building and the like have changed. So really this is just a renew and an update of the policy to reflect current standards and current expectations. So in reviewing the policy, we've worked closely with Gippsland Ports to make sure that it also meets their requirements as a waterway manager. As well as reviewing the policy, we've also made a couple of changes, which means that one of the recommendations before you is actually to revoke an application fee that we used to have for people to apply for their private jetty, and instead use the planning permit application process and the associated fees as part of the way we will assess applications going forward. I'm happy to take any questions, and the report is before you. Thank you, Mayor.
Terrific. Thank you, Ms Weigel. Again, councillors, are there any questions, clarification or otherwise? Councillor White.
I was just wondering, in regards to the jetty, so does every property along the canals have the right to actually build a jetty, or is there a requirement for some to share?
Good point.
So just looking at the map here, there's a lot of properties.
The policy does outline who's able to apply for a jetty and who is not. And really it is those properties that abut the water have the ability to apply. But as you've identified, there is an opportunity to share as well, and that is encouraged. So long as it doesn't impact on the navigability of the waterway. So really it's limited to those properties that abut the waterway and meet all the requirements outlined in the policy.
Right, good question, thanks. Value your curiosity. Councillor Crook.
Just a question of clarification. This new policy will only pertain to new constructions, correct?
That's right, only new, or if there is a change, a modification to the jetty, it would need to then be assessed under the current conditions.
Okay, thanks. Great, thanks, Councillor Crook. Are there any other questions, councillors? If there are no other questions, we have a recommendation. Would I have a motion? Thank you, Councillor Crook. Would anybody second it? Councillor Stowe. Councillor Crook, would you like to speak to the motion?
Sure. Just to say that I guess this new policy is a reflection of the fact that significant construction on a waterway, it's quite a reasonable expectation that it'll be subject to the building permit application process. I think that's fairly reasonable.
Yep.
And I guess it just replaces a now somewhat outdated previous policy. So it's somewhat procedural in that matter. There may be some who are not so happy with the new policy, but I would suggest that this will probably bring about better outcomes in terms of the overall construction and the suitability of those constructions to the area. So I'm happy to endorse the motion.
Thanks, Councillor Crook. Councillor Stowe, you've seconded it. Would you like to speak to the motion?
No, thank you. Nothing to add.
Great, thank you. Councillors, is the motion opposed? Would anybody else like to speak for or against the motion? In which case I'll put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? Thanks, councillors. Passed unanimously. Thanks, Ms Weigel, for your section there. We're moving on to Mr Canizzaro's section, so business excellence, and we're on to item 5.3.1, surrender of Bairnsdale Cemetery to the Crown.
Thank you, Mayor, and through you, Mayor. Councillors, before you is a report titled The Surrender of Bairnsdale Cemetery to the Crown. Some of the key points for you to consider tonight, councillors. Council officers did an audit of council-owned property titles, and it was identified that the Bairnsdale Cemetery was in council's name, which is quite unusual, I must say. The Bairnsdale Cemetery is managed by the Bairnsdale Cemetery Trust, which is appointed by the Department of Health under the Act, Cemeteries and Crematoria Act of 2003. As the cemetery is managed by the Bairnsdale Cemetery Trust, council does not have any obligations with respect to maintaining the cemetery or funding the cemetery in any way, shape or form. And therefore council officers are proposing and recommending to you tonight that the cemetery be surrendered to the Crown. The cemetery is located at number 10 Cemetery Road in Bairnsdale. The land on which the cemetery is located is a Crown grant of land, and you will see that in the attachments, Attachment 1 and Attachment 2 to the report. With respect to the financial side of things, the Trust is a wholly self-funded entity which funds itself through the sale of services such as burials, plaque sales and so on. The Trust is also able to apply for grants from the Department of Health to undertake works at the cemetery. So therefore, council, as I said earlier, do not contribute any funding to the operation or the management of the cemetery. Officers have also liaised with and had some engagement with the Department of Health, particularly the Cemetery Sector Governance Support Officer, just to ensure that the surrender of land is consistent with the Cemeteries and Crematoria Act 2003, which it is. So councillors, the report is presented to you tonight with the recommendations. So thank you, Mayor.
Thanks, Mr Cannizzaro. Are there any questions? Councillor Crook, then Councillor Uri, I believe.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Peter. What's the circumstance if the Crown doesn't want it back or won't accept it back?
The situation is that they will, is our understanding, accept the surrender of the land back to the Crown. That will be DELP, and DELP obviously will appoint the Department of Health to manage and undertake whatever it has to do with respect to funding the Cemetery Trust.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for that, Councillor Uri.
Thank you. Mr Cannizzaro, would it be sort of correct to say that what we're trying to do here, or what councillors are being asked to do, is to correct an anomaly? Is that right?
Yes, short answer is yes, Councillor Uri, through you, Mayor.
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Uri. Councillor Greeson.
I just wanted to ask how we benefit by handing it back or giving it to the Crown, given that we don't do much.
Thank you, Councillor Greeson, through you, Mayor. Again, most of the other cemeteries are under the auspice of the DELP, and then they appoint through the Department of Health to manage and run the cemeteries. So the benefit is we don't, as council, do not require it in our property portfolio, so to speak.
Interesting. Thanks, Councillor Reeson. Are there any other questions, councillors? There's a recommendation there in front of us, councillors. Do we have a motion? Councillor Stowe, seconded Councillor Allen. Thank you. Councillor Stowe, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, look, this is the only cemetery left in our Shire that we have an interest in, and Peter summed it up very well. I think it makes sense to hand it over to DELP and along with all the other cemeteries they manage.
Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Allen, you seconded it. Did you want to speak?
Thanks, Mark. I think Trevor's pretty well summed it up, the situation. It's just normalising it with every other major cemetery.
Yep, sure. Is the motion opposed? Would anybody else like to speak for or against the motion? Thanks, councillors, in which case I'll put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? Those against? No. Carried unanimously. Thanks, councillors. We're on to item 3.2, which is school crossing supervision program funding, and we certainly are romping through a range of different topics tonight. So here's another one, and we've got Sam McPherson with us as well to help. Is that correct? And you starting it though, Peter. Thank you.
I will. Thank you, Mayor, and through you, Mayor. Councillors, before you is a report seeking your endorsement to advocate to the State Government and the Municipal Association of Victoria for an immediate increase to council funding under the School Crossing Supervision Program, and also request that a new funding model be developed which removes the financial burden on council and ratepayers. Key points for you to consider tonight, councillors, is that the current funding arrangements were implemented in the 1970s and have remained largely unchanged since then. School crossings exist to provide safe access to education facilities and services, and obviously protect our children. Under the current arrangements, East Gippsland Shire Council and ratepayers subsidise that to about 60% of the operating cost of a school crossing. So that equates to approximately $135,000 per annum. As the cost of service delivery increases year on year and the subsidy provided by the state remains largely static, their operating cost to council will continue to increase unless the funding model is changed. The report, and I must make it clear, the report does not seek to close any of the existing school crossings or alter the staffing levels. It really is about seeking more grant funding from the state. Tonight, also, councillors, with me is Sam McPherson, who is the Manager, Regulatory and Compliance Services, who can answer any of your technical questions if there are any. The report is presented for your consideration, councillors. Thank you, Mayor.
Thanks, Mr Cannizzaro, and thanks and welcome, Mr McPherson. Nice to see you are at Salmon Rocks tonight. Couldn't be a better place at sunset. Councillors, are there any questions? Councillor White.
Thank you. Historically, I recollect that this was, at the time they were called Vic Roads, were they responsible and sort of passed this on to council with a fund to cover the costs? And as Mr Cannizzaro has pointed out, it's gradually, the cost has grown and the subsidy has remained static, and it goes back for some time. And I think there was just perhaps a flippant comment that perhaps we would withdraw our services, but of course for the safety of the children, I think that's not a wise thing. But I would like to think that this reaches a better outcome than we've been getting of recent times, as is the gap between what the council's got to support, which is our ratepayers' money, is widening. And
do you have a question, Councillor White? So
the background to it, that we received this this job, I suppose, or inherited this job from Regional Roads.
Regional Roads or Vic Roads.
Yes, way back, and we've honoured that agreement all this time.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor.
Mr Cannizzaro or Sam?
Yeah, Sam, I might ask Sam if he has any recollection. of
Historical context on that, Mr
source is
McPherson?
from.
Yes. Thank you, Mayor, and thanks for the question, Councillor White. That is my understanding. Granted, I wasn't around in the 1970s when the original agreements came into place, but that's my understanding, that it was one where the state was passing on a subsidy. However, over time, that agreement, through lack of updating, has meant that ratepayers across the board, not just in East Gippsland, are left carrying the lion's share of the funding responsibility to deliver the school crossing services.
Thanks for the question, John, and thanks for that, Sam. And I dare say you're much too young to have been escorted across a school crossing in the 1970s. Are there any other questions, councillors? Councillor Van Diggle, you would have been escorted across a crossing at some stage not that long ago compared to many of us.
Actually, I lived right near the school, so I never had that. when I grew up
Okay, you didn't have to
overseas.
cross the road.
No, I didn't have to cross the road. Lucky me. But thank you for pointing out how young I am. Obviously, this is not just an issue that's facing our council, but are we the only one currently that you know of that's advocating for this? Or is it other councils also advocating for it?
Great question.
Sometimes it strengthens the argument if there's more than one council. Not sure who can answer that.
I might,
Mr Cannizzaro, is that?
Throw that to Mr McPherson.
Sam.
No worries, thanks, Peter. Through you, Mr Mayor, thank you, Councillor Van der Gel. We aren't the only council advocating for this at the moment. Mr Mayor, you may recall a letter received from the City of Monash, would have been in December, late December last year. They have adopted a similar position in terms of reviewing their service delivery for school crossings, and wrote to all councils across the state advocating for really a joint approach or joint advocacy to the state via both contacting the responsible minister directly, but also working with MAV to form a unified voice. Outside of the City of Monash, there has also been other councils that have taken a different position. Southern Grampians Shire actually resolved last year to essentially hand back their school crossings to Department of Transport. Information from them is that they, how do I word this, haven't been successful or immediately successful in that actioning that resolution, and are still in discussions with the Department of Transport to actually action that resolution. But definitely we're not the only council that's looking at this as a service provision and at trying to advocate for a better funding arrangement from the state.
Thanks, Mr McPherson. That would have been a very bold move from Southern Grampians, I would have thought.
Yeah, thank you.
Councillor White.
That's just raised this question which I was alluring to. And Sam, did that actually leave the crossings unattended by a supervisor? Do you know? Because that's the background to this, is that that's not what we'd want to do. And but whether they've got their point across, the Southern Grampians, and have received assistance.
Through you, Mr Mayor.
Sure.
Mayor, and thank you, Councillor White. My understanding is that no, it hasn't left the crossings unstaffed. Southern Grampians has continued to provide that service whilst they negotiate with the state government.
Well, we'll certainly watch this space and see how they go, I dare say. Are there any other questions, councillors? Councillor Stowe, thank you.
Sam, wouldn't this be an issue that the MAV should get their teeth into?
I think the correct answer is yes, Sam.
Yes.
Perhaps
yes,
the next question is why aren't we
we
pursuing it through MAV?
Thank you, Councillor Stowe. Part of the recommendation is to seek MAV's involvement as advocating on behalf of the sector to have a sector-wide approach for this.
You were just tricking us that you hadn't seen that, Councillor Stowe, hadn't you?
I had seen it, but we won't go any further.
That's
Thank
all right.
you.
Good on you. Thanks, Councillor Stowe, for that clarification. Are there any other questions, councillors? It's an important piece of work that we need to advocate for to ensure the continuity of safety of our children and the sustainability for the Shire. Are there any other questions or comments? I see none. We have a recommendation. Do we have a motion? Councillor Crook, thank you. Councillor White, thank you. Seconded. Councillor Crook, would you like to speak?
Just to say that I support the recommendation of the officers here. Clearly, the costs are increasing and we need help from the state government to ensure that those costs aren't increasingly borne by the ratepayers, given that it's largely a state government responsibility. So I'm happy to endorse the recommendations as written.
Thanks, Councillor Crook. Councillor White, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, thank you. I just to highlight that how important this is, because of course Highway 1 runs straight through the middle of Bairnsdale, and there are 2 crossings on the Princes Highway, and it's just essential for the safety of these young children attending their primary school crossings, and I would just hope that we can get a good resolution from this because of the importance of it.
Yep, good point, well made, and those crossing supervisors are well loved by those students too. Is the motion opposed? Would anybody else like to speak for or against the motion? Councillor Uri.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just briefly in support of the motion, Council obviously has an advocacy policy, which is something that we've been building over the last few months. So I just would like to see this being added to I don't think this is added to that document, but perhaps we should add it. And obviously we have meetings with state and federal representatives. A state member with our state meeting with our state member is coming up soon, and perhaps it could be added to that for discussion as well. But happy to support
Great point.
the motion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Would anybody else like to speak to, for or against the motion? Thanks, councillors. Well, let's do our best for those well-loved lollipop crossing people. I'll put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? Thanks, councillors. Carried unanimously, CEO. Mr Cannizzaro, we're moving on to item 5.3.3, which is the Council Plan Quarterly Progress Report. And thank you for providing that. I see Jamie Lynch is with us as well. Mr Lynch, terrific.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Through you, Mayor.
Terrific.
I will be brief as Jamie is on the line.
Yep.
Before you, councillors, is a report seeking the endorsement of the Council Plan Progress Report for Quarter 2 for the financial year 21-22. The Quarter 2 report covers the reporting period 1st September to 31 December 21 and provides a high-level summary of major initiatives, strategic indicators and actions listed in the Annual Action Plan for 21-22. The Annual Action Plan is a companion document to the Council Plan of 21-25 as it identifies the actions that the organisation will take to implement the Council Plan over the year. The quarterly reports are prepared as a way for councillors and officers to report to the East Gippsland and community periodically on the implementation of the Council Plan. The major initiatives listed in the Annual Action Plan highlight the actions that represent significant high priority activities. So for the Quarter 2, so that is for the period ending 31 December 2021, 9 of the 10 major initiatives are on schedule, with 1 remaining behind schedule at that particular date of 31 December 2021. Some highlights from the major initiatives include that work has commenced and is on schedule for the development of asset management plans for several of the Council's main asset classes. The updated Municipal Emergency Management Plan has been completed and is being audited. The Tourism Event Strategy can be further progressed now that the Events Growth Action Plan has been adopted by Council, and the Community Engagement Toolkit is progressing well, with a number of reference documents developed to assist with the creating of a consistent approach with respect to engagement. The report, councillors, presented to you tonight. We do have Jamie Lynch, who has been instrumental in producing this report. So Jamie is available to answer any questions of a technical nature if you have them. So the report is presented to you, councillors. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you, Mr Cannizzaro, and a beautifully prepared report it is too, Jamie, so congratulations to you and the team. Councillors, are there any questions? Councillor Uri.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Hello, Jamie. I think this actually relates to one of the items rather than the report itself, which I agree is beautifully presented. Thank you. It might be a question for Ms Weigel. It relates to the carbon emissions, and it's item 3.1.1, and it's on page 136 of our notes. That's page 19, I think, of the report. It's it's the first item there with the red dot beside it, and it's about the VECO energy agreement being finalised, which will see council participate in switching to 100% renewables energy early in 2022, which I believe had been done, but it says this project has been delayed due to resourcing. I just wondered if I could understand that a bit better, please.
Sorry, that's my drafting. So the action was to adopt greenhouse gas emission scenarios for 2050. So we have implemented the VECO energy agreement and are obviously using green energy now, but we're still to finalise the adoption of the greenhouse gas emissions scenario for 2050. So it has been commenced, but it has, as we've said, it's been delayed slightly. We've been a team member down for a little while, so still in progress, but not yet complete.
Okay, thank you, Ms Weigel. If I could have another question, please.
Absolutely.
And sorry this report is full of things that have been achieved, which is absolutely wonderful, but I just want, for the benefit of those people, again, who might be listening, I would just like to have an understanding of the arts and culture strategy, because that's one of the major initiatives that has been delayed, please.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think we might ask Mr Lynch to respond to you, Councillor Uri, through you, Mayor.
Sure.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Did you get that question, Jamie?
Yes, I did. Thank you, Mayor. So the arts and culture strategy is obviously a key major initiative for the year, but the delay in the delivery has been due to resourcing. But as Mr Cannizzaro alluded to, this report is as of 31st of December 2021, and you may be familiar that there's been a little bit of action taking place since then with the development of the strategy. So there has been some progress where it can start to get back on track, such as it's looking to engage a consultant to help with the development and working through some recommendations from the previous arts, culture and heritage strategies. So there is some work happening in that space since the end of this report, which is good news.
Terrific.
Great.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Mr Lynch.
Thank you, Jamie. Are there any other questions, councillors? In which case, councillors, there is a motion a recommendation. Do I have a motion? Let me just find the report. There we are. Councillor Van Diggle, terrific. Seconder, please, councillors. Councillor Greason, terrific. Councillor Van Diggle, would you like to speak to the motion?
I'm surprised not everyone's hand went up. I always look forward to receiving this report. It shows, I guess, the broad range of projects and work that we do at council. So obviously I'm happy to approve the recommendation. You're doing that to me, Trevor? No. Okay, sorry, I'm distracted by he's doing like hoops or something.
Yes, I'm not sure.
The blinds down.
The blinds are down, I think. So, yeah, but the sun's on. Have some sunglasses. Sorry, for those who are watching, we've got a setting sun shining through the westerly windows and shining a light on Councillor Stowe, by the way, actually.
And it's right over Councillor Kirsten's head.
Councillor Van Diggle has a halo tonight, by the looks of it. Terrific. So thank you. Sorry for the distraction, Councillor Van Diggle. So terrific. Now, I'm being distracted. Who seconded that tonight? Councillor Greason.
Oh dear. Apart from halos and sun setting, I'm very pleased to support this. It's great to see it evolving and our plans put in action. So thank you.
Fantastic. Councillors, is the motion opposed? And would anybody else like to speak for or against the motion? Councillor Uri, thank you.
Yes, so like Councillor Van Diggle, I find this is a really key report to be receiving, and it does highlight an enormous amount of work that's been done within council. I did want to say though that it's not the only work that gets done in council, and I failed to mention earlier in this meeting that we were speaking about the Black Summer bushfire grants that have been received by our communities. And one thing that's not reflected in this report is the enormous amount of work that does in supporting the communities in writing those grant applications. So while it's pleasing to see the progress in all these areas, it's not the only work. And I congratulate our staff for all the work they do.
Yep,
Thank
quite
you,
so.
Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to speak to the motion? Councillors, I'm going to say a couple of words and just point out that I think in particular the work around inclusive engagement I think is really important in this particular piece of work, and engaging with the Disability Advisory Committee, the youth ambassadors and the aged ambassadors and their input. And it's great to have that breadth and diversity in our community consulted on the work of council. So I just want to point that out and congratulate council officers for engaging those committees who volunteer their time and make a contribution to make our work better. So thank you so much, and Mr Lynch and your team once again for a great report, visually engaging and certainly encourages curiosity to read it when it is so engaging. Thank you, councillors. I'll put the motion to the vote then. All those in favour? Thanks, councillors. Carried unanimously, CEO. Thanks, Mr Cannizzaro. I think your work is done for the moment. And Mr McConnell, we're moving into your realm. And councillors, we're on to place and community item 5.4. And let me just find my way, navigate through here. And 5.4.1 is the final submission, Central and Gippsland Regional Sustainable Water Strategy. And this report we have seen, but can you please give us an update and take us away there, Mr McConnell?
Thank you, Mayor, and through you. Councillors, before you tonight's a report seeking your endorsement of a submission to the consultation by the Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning on the Central and Gippsland Regional Sustainable Water Strategy. Council officers prepared a submission and that was lodged with DELP on the 10th of December, in line with the deadlines for consultation. However, that was with a caveat that the submission would be subject to endorsement by council, and hence the report and recommendation this evening. The submission really focuses on both the importance of the agricultural sector to the East Gippsland community and in its economy, and the opportunities to ensure the ongoing productivity of that sector, but also the health of the Gippsland lakes and the importance of not sacrificing one for the other, but seeking to deliver on both of those outcomes. I would note that the submission was prepared with quite detailed support and input from Council's Agricultural Sector Advisory Committee, and I'd just like to acknowledge their work and more generally the work that the committee is doing. The minutes of previous meeting are attached, or for your information in any case, to this report. So with that, I just present this report to you for your consideration and the recommendation that you endorse this submission. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr McConnell, and absolutely echo those words about our Agricultural Sector Advisory Committee and the work they do. What a powerful group of people they are. Councillors, are there any questions of Mr McConnell? Comprehensive report. Councillors, in that case, there is a recommendation. Do we have a motion? Thank you, Councillor Uri. A seconder? Councillor Crook, thank you. Councillor Uri, would you like to speak?
Thank you. Just briefly, Mr Mayor, I do think that this is a very important submission, and I'm glad we're making it, and thank you, Mr McConnell, for drafting it for councillors' consideration. I also acknowledge the work of our Ag Sector Advisory Committee in giving valuable feedback here, and so a lot of the flavour of the submission is around the water requirements and issues that they see as part of their industry, which is incredibly important. But I also appreciate the fact that the health of the Gippsland lakes has been highlighted here, and that should not be compromised in the way we manage the water into the future. There's a third point, I think, which I really appreciate that you've highlighted in the submission, Mr McConnell, and that is that council needs increased information to help it, and not only in its job as land managers, but to inform current and future strategic planning, and particularly in the face of climate modelling and water resources. And this document that we've read, the background document to this, actually does give some pretty stark predictions. And if I could just read one little section, the climate predictions demonstrate high confidence for longer duration dry seasons across southern Australia, reduced soil moisture and stream flow, greater rates of evapotranspiration, reduced alpine snow cover, greater intensity of summer rainfall, risk of flash flooding, elevated risk of soil erosion and attenuation into catchments. So these predictions have alerted the region to develop sustainable water use plans. So in the face of comments like that, which can be backed up with data, I think it's incredibly important, and I'm very pleased that Council has highlighted that fact that we need better information so that we can manage these conditions into the future.
Great, spot on, thank you. Councillor Crook, did you want to speak?
Just to endorse what Mr McConnell and Ms Deary have said, obviously water is critical for life. And the climate change competition for that water is increasing all the time, not just for agriculture but for environmental uses as well. This submission, I believe, articulates Council's position well to decision makers within state government and highlights our concerns adequately, so I'm good with it.
Great, thank you. Councillors, is the motion opposed? Would anybody else like to speak for or against the motion? I'll just make the point, councillors, I think the critical issue is our Gippsland lakes, and thank you for raising that. You know, they're close to your heart, Councillor Allen, and you know, the concerns around flooding of mines in Latrobe Valley and the impact on Gippsland lakes with that. El Nino, La Nina, we hear what's happening in Argentina at the moment, catastrophic fires. You know, we're part of a world environment, and this is not just a story about us, but it's a story about our place in the world. So thanks, councillors, and thank you, Mr McConnell, for the report, and to that ag sector. They're deeply embedded in this and know it very well. So thank you, councillors, for your words and your endorsement. I'll put this motion to the vote. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you, CEO. Mr McConnell, we're moving on to item 5.4.2, planning permit application 403 2012P, 2-lot subdivision 7, Sunset Boulevard. And looks like we've got Mr Richardson and Mr Pringle online as well. But I think that you will take us away in the first instance. Thanks, Stuart.
Thank you, Mayor, and through you, councillors. Before you is a report in relation to an application for planning permit for a 2-lot subdivision at 7 Sunset Boulevard, Paynesville. The proposal is to subdivide the land into 2 lots, and the land is approximately 1,000 square metres in size. There were a number of objections, and then as a result, in accordance with our delegation's policy, the matter was presented to a planning consultation meeting on the 24th of January, and you have the minutes from that meeting that allowed both the applicant and the objectors to set out the proposal and their concerns about the proposal, so that councillors had the opportunity to be fully aware of those things. A detailed assessment against the East Gippsland planning scheme has been undertaken, and that's presented in the report. The conclusion from that is that the proposal is not consistent with the relevant planning scheme policies, and as a result, the recommendation is that council issue a notice of refusal to grant a planning permit. So councillors, you have the report in front of you, you have the recommendation, and as was mentioned, Martin Richardson is available to assist with any questions in relation to this matter. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr McConnell. And yes, we've got 2 officers there, and councillors an opportunity to seek clarification or ask questions on this planning application, which was a subject to a public consultation meeting that many of you attended, if you were able. Seems to be a comprehensive report, officers. Well, I don't have any questions so far. The gears are clicking. No, in which case, councillors, there's a recommendation there. Do I have a motion? Councillor Allen, thank you. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Greason, waving, seconding? Seconding, terrific, thank you. That's clear. Councillor Allen, would you like to speak to the motion?
Only to say that I think the report's very, very clear, and I have no hesitation in recommending that we accept the officers' recommendations in this matter.
Thanks, Councillor Allen. Councillor Greason?
Ditto, thank you.
Thank you. Is the motion opposed? Would you like to speak against the motion, Councillor Uri?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm actually I've been sitting on the fence on this one. I find it a bit of a difficult one, despite the officer's report. I've been to have a look at the block. I generally am looking for a diversity of housing options in developments in East Gippsland so that we don't take up all the land. You know, I want some smaller size blocks, and I know that we need to accommodate a diversity of uses. For example, I don't know, teenage children or elderly people wanting to stay in places they age or whatever. So that's why I think we need a diversity. I think there are a couple of blocks in this development which are smaller, so it's not without precedence here. So I'm going to vote against the recommendation.
Yeah, thanks for clarifying that, and we value your opinion and your points of view there. Councillors, does anybody else like to speak for or against the motion? Councillor Allen, you have a right of reply, should you wish to accept it or use it.
No, I'll just proceed as it is. Thanks, mate.
Good, thanks, Councillor Allen. Councillors, in which case I will put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Is that correct? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Those against? I see 2. Councillor Van Diggle, Councillor Uri, and Councillor Crook abstaining. The motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. Thank you, Mr Pringle and Mr Richardson. Stand by. We're on to the next item, which is item 5.4.3, which is one of our favourites, a proposal to end an agreement AG 845895P 79 Angophora Drive, Mallacoota. And I would pronounce it Angophora. Some people would pronounce it Angophora, but Angophora is how I would do it. So, Mr McConnell.
Thank you, Mayor, and through you, councillors. The report you have before you is a proposal to end the Section 173 agreement as it relates to 79 Angophora Drive, Mallacoota. Now you've got me all mixed up.
Depends on the emphasis on which syllable.
That's right. The catalyst to end the agreement is the potential for a future subdivision of the land. The agreement was entered into in relation to a previous subdivision that has since lapsed, having only been partly implemented. And in the intervening time, some of the requirements have changed, and particularly in relation to the bushfire management overlay, which makes the previous subdivision not appropriate. So the obligations of the agreement are now inconsistent with the current planning requirements, and so there is a need to end the agreement. Council provided in principle support to end the agreement last year on the 26th of October, and consultation has now been carried out and no objections were received. So you have the report and the recommendation in front of you, and Robert Pringle is available to assist with any questions on this one, should there be any.
Terrific. Thanks for that, Mr McConnell. Councillors? Councillor Crook, question.
Thank you. I noticed that the existing 173 agreement, part of that is relates to the retention of native vegetation. If that's removed, how's that going to affect the outcomes in terms of that vegetation retention?
So the existing, the requirements of the planning scheme today in relation to protection of native vegetation are what would be required, would apply for future development. But I'll ask Robert Pringle if there's anything further you want to add in relation to that.
Thank you, Councillor, for the question, and through you, Mr. Mayor.
Yes. We lost you there, Robert.
That's for native vegetation.
We're going to start that again, Robert, if you could. Take two.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, the requirements for native vegetation removal are inherent part of the planning scheme today. In fact, they are probably more stringent than they were at the time of the original subdivision. So any new applications must address the native vegetation provisions afresh, and the removal of the agreement will not remove any of those protections that are in place in the scheme today.
Great, thanks for that, Robert. We just had a little bit of a staccato there, but was there enough information to answer your question, Tom?
Yes,
is that
thank
great?
you.
Thanks, Robert. Councillors, any other questions on this matter? Thanks for your consideration then, councillors. There is a recommendation. Do we have a motion? Thanks, Councillor Stowe. A seconder? Councillor Crook. Councillor Stowe, would you like to speak to the matter?
No, not really. Thank you, Mayor. I think it's been well summed up by
Good
Robert.
on you. Thank you, Councillor Crook. Happy with that. Is the motion opposed, councillors? Anybody else like to speak for or against the motion? In which case I'll put it to the vote. Councillors, all those in favour? Thanks, CEO. We've carried that unanimously. Mr McConnell, we're on to your last item in this section, which is item 5.4.4, councillors. Here we are on page 276, and this is a request to end in principle support of a legal agreement AD 089276J at 8B Kingscote Drive, Metung.
Thank you, Mayor. So the purpose of the report is to seek Council's in principle support for the landowner's request to end the Section 173 agreement. And just a reminder that the process is a two-step process. Firstly, in principle support, then consultation is undertaken and it comes back for a further decision. So in relation to this, the catalyst relates to proposal for development of the site. The previous arrangements would have, and the building envelope that was established in relation to that today would see us requiring, or would be assessed with a high bell level that would require probably most likely native vegetation removal, and so there's other for the development to proceed, and so that's why there's a desire to move the location within the property. And so the request is that 173 agreement that included the building envelope be removed. So the report is before you. It has the background for this, and again, Robert Pringle's available to assist with any questions.
Thanks, Mr McConnell. Councillors, any questions? Clarification required. Wow, the reports are very comprehensive, it looks. Councillors are satisfied. In which case, councillors, there is a recommendation. Do I have a motion? Thanks, Councillor Crook. Seconder, Councillor Van Diggle. There we are. Sorry, I looked at that way, but that's all right. Would you like to speak to the motion, Councillor Crook?
Oh, no, I don't think so.
Councillor Van Diggle. Is the motion opposed? Anybody else like to speak for or against the motion? In which case, councillors, I'll put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? Thanks, councillors. Carried unanimously. Thanks, Mr McConnell. You are free. Well done, officers. Thank you for your comprehensive reports. Councillors, we're moving on to item... well, there's no urgent and other business from what I can understand. No, none that's been notified. So item 7, which is confidential business, councillors. And in this section, I will need someone to move us into camera. Councillor Stowe and seconded Councillor Allen. Councillor Stowe, would you read that item for me, please? Can you see that page 315 on your notes? I move that under section 66(2), etc.
open.
We're in the open meeting now, so you just need to read that so that we can move into... He's got it there. Are you happy to read it for
Certainly
Councillor
under
Stowe?
66.2 of the Local Government Act 2020, a meeting considering confidential information may be closed to the public pursuant to section 33, 1, 65, 66, 5 of the Local Government Act. The information contained in this report is confidential because it contains personal information that would, if released, result in the unreasonable disclosure of information about personal affairs.
Fantastic. You've
Thank
read
you,
that.
Councillor.
Thank you. Seconded, Councillor Allen. Thank you. Need to speak to that at all? No. Is the motion opposed? Anybody else like to speak to it? I'll put the motion to the vote. Sorry for being procedural, but we'll put it to the vote. All in favour? Thank you, councillors. Carried unanimously. We'll close the meeting Good. Thank you, councillors. We're live again, councillors. Councillors, we're just live again. So thank you. There's gathered thousands watching. So, councillors, I'm about to declare the meeting closed. But before I do, can I thank you all for your work and your input tonight, and the decision making that you've made. Can I also thank and recognise the work of the officers to produce comprehensive reports and provide information for the councillors to make informed and powerful decisions. And I think that's really important. And in my time as a councillor, I think that these reports are getting better and better and enabling councillors to have more agency over their decisions. So thanks very